Yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the passing of Rush Limbaugh. And I wanted time to digest it and think about it, because a lot of people talk about Rush, who was crucially important to this country and is horribly missed. Can you imagine if we had Rush today helping us in the cause of liberty, the cause of Americanism, and also pushing back against the Jew haters, the Christian haters, the Carlsons, the Kellys, the Bannons, and the rest? He'd be at the forefront. Now, how do I know this? Rush and I were like this. The fact of the matter is, when he was hearing and when he could hear, we would talk on the phone almost every night, sometimes till 1:30 in the morning. He stayed up late like I do. His real vice was those damn cigars. You know, he passed away from cancer, and but they were nonstop. But that said, we would talk about everything and anything. I remember when I was asked to do a radio show. I never really pursued it. I was asked to do a radio show in New York on WABC. And I thought, let me give this a try, because I was given like the worst slot in radio, which was Sunday, 12 to 2 p.m. And people are going to church, and Sunday, and, people want to cool off a little bit. And I said, I think I should give this a try. I mean, after all, it's the biggest talk station in America. It's WABC in New York. I've been a fan of that station my whole life. Rush is on that station. Sean was on that station, although in the evenings. And I said to Rush, what do I say that you and Sean haven't already said? And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, but Mark, the audience hasn't heard from you. From you. I said, wow, you mean? He said, Mark, we talk every night. Talk to the audience. And that's what I've done ever since. And on WABC in New York, when I eventually got a program at 6 p.m. at their request, it was 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 3 hours, and ABC Radio Network decided to syndicate me. It was called the Killer's Row. It would be Rush Limbaugh, 12 to 3, Hannity, 3 to 6, Levin, 6 to 9. It was Killer's Row. I can remember we used to defeat the Yankees and the Mets in the ratings. It was a big deal. So I decided I was going to write a book. I was going to write a book about the courts. And I wrote a book about the courts. And Rush said, let me take a look at that book before it was out. So it was in, printout form off the printer. So I sent it to him, and he read it. He said, you know what I'd like to do for you? Write the introduction. I said, really? At this point, he had anointed me F. Lee Levin, the head of his legal division. F. Lee Levin, after F. Lee Bailey. Those of you who never heard him, Google it. I'm not necessarily a big F. Lee Bailey fan. He's passed away, certainly in his latter years, but he also worked on the O.J. Simpson trial and so forth. What happened is I started to listen to Rush. Like everybody else, I said, who is this guy? He's unbelievable. He's hilarious. He takes no prisoners. He's advancing the cause. And I became friendly with Catherine Gleason, who he called Cookie, because, he was never PC, Rush, and he was always attacked for it. And I began to hear Rush talk about some legal issues, some constitutional issues, and so I would, back then, fax to her my thoughts about the Constitution or the law, and I said he might be interested in this. And the way his setup was back then, she would have to run down the hallway from the fax machine down to his office and give it to him. And he was always appreciative. He said, tell Mark, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then one day out of the blue, he said, F. Lee Levin, the head of my legal division. Well, there was no legal division, of course. And from that point forward, I would provide substantial information on the Constitution, on the law, and so forth and so on. He's a man who was so generous so generous. I had a bad heart. I still do, but I had a bad heart. I had a big problem, and my insurance, it wasn't clear that they would pay for it. So he's talking to me, and I said, Rush, I'm going to be gone a few days. Well, where are you going? I think I said, I'm going to the Cleveland Clinic. He said, how you getting there? I said, he said, let me send my plan. I said, no, I've got this. I'm going there. But thank you. He said, is your insurance covering this? I said, honestly, I don't have any idea. You know what he said? I'll pay for it. I said, well, it could be tens of thousands. I don't know what it. He said, I'll pay for it. I never got a salary or income, for the legal things that I would do. I did it because I wanted to help him and support the cause. Anyway, the insurance did cover it, all but the initial amount, I think, was $1,500 or $2,500. This was many years ago. And obviously, I paid that out of my pocket. And he said, by the way, F. Lee, he still called me F. Lee, unless he was very serious. He would say, hey, Mark, what happened with that bill? I said, well, the insurance covered it, except for this deposit amount. I paid that. He said, well, let me write you a check. I said, no, I'm okay. This is the way he was. When I wrote a book called Rescuing Sprite, he read the book. He said, I want you to come down to Palm Beach. I want you to come into my studio. I want to interview you in person about this book. I said, really? He said, this is a heartfelt book. People need to hear this side of you. I said, well, okay, I appreciate that. What happened was my dog Sprite, our dog Sprite, passed away. We had to put him to sleep. And that's the first time we ever did that. And I was heartbroken. I'm always heartbroken. I get very down, even depressed. I shut my door. I usually lose 25 pounds or something like that. I won't eat. It's just very upsetting to me. So we did that. And the interesting thing about that book was it was an accident. I had agreed with Simon & Schuster to write a book that would become Liberty and Tyranny. It's a book that had been in my mind for 30 years, 20 years, 30 years. And Spritey passed away, and I told Simon & Schuster I'm not interested in writing a book anymore. And David Limbaugh, who's my lawyer, along with my wife, but he was my lawyer then as well, he suggested to Simon & Schuster, why don't you let him write a book about his dog? And then he'll write the book that became known as Liberty and Tyranny, the #1 conservative book in the last 25 years. They said, okay, write it, but let's move it. We want to push the big book. So I wrote it and talked about it. Rescuing Sprite was on with Rush. And it went up to #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. So what did the folks at Simon & Schuster say? By the way, great publisher for me. Why don't you spend some time talking about that book until you write your next book? Because it became a big hit. But that was Rush. And there's so many other things I could tell you that are confidential that I don't want to go into when he had his difficult times. I remember the time that I had this bright idea. I thought it would be hilarious. I was at Landmark Legal Foundation president there. I called my buddies over and I said, I'm going to nominate Rush for the Nobel Peace Prize. That will drive them nuts. And we looked it up and they said, you can't nominate Rush for the Nobel Peace Prize. You have to be this category, this people, this. So who cares? Media won't know. I'm going to nominate him. So I called Rush and said, hey, I'm going to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize. F. Lee, that's a great idea. Let's go ahead and do that. So I nominated him. We wrote a whole letter to the Nobel Committee or whatever it was, and we put out a big release. And so Rush would say, I've been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. It was a big shtick that we did. So the New York Times writes this very serious article that Levin and Landmark Legal nominated Rush Limbaugh for the Nobel Prize. And at the end they said, and they're not even able to do it. They're not qualified to do it. I said, these people are stupid. So Rush and I were all laughing and laughing. Look at all the press. And it went on. AP, they all wrote stories about Rush Nobel Prize. Should he get the Nobel Prize? He's controversial. No way should he get... And we just laughed for about 2 weeks as that went on. There was a lot of things like that where we spent a Thanksgiving with him at his home and so forth. He was nicer than people even say, who say he's nice. He was more generous than people even say. He was smart, smarter than people even say. He read and read and read, morning, noon, and night. He had hated college. By the way, I hated college. He went a different way. He dropped out. He said, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Me, I said, let me get through this quickly, and I did my thing. He did his thing. We had so many things in common. He was just a dear, dear friend, and I miss him a ton. And the truth is that he, Sean, Hannity, and I were all very tight, all very, very good friends, and I miss him a lot. But this is the book where he wrote the introduction, Men in Black. You may have heard about this. This was really the book that I wrote first that took off, and then publishers started competing. Oh, will you write a book for us, and so forth and so on. And I've never looked back when it comes to writing books again. The last thing I'll say about him is this. He was a big Donald Trump fan. He was also a big Ted Cruz fan, by the way. But he was a big Donald Trump fan. And I think they had a lot in common in many ways. They went against the system. They did things their way. They are both attacked for doing things their way. They speak their mind, both of them, and they were attacked for that. They were hated by the left, hated by the media, where in his case is in Donald Trump's case, because of their reach, because of their ability to persuade, because of their popularity with what we call the common man, even though I don't think there's such a thing, but I'll play along. The common man, Mr. and Mrs. America, as I call you. They had an appeal, a charisma, an intelligence, a way about them that really sparked interest and support and love. And 5 years ago in a day, he passed away. The last few months, he knew he was passing away. He fought that damn cancer with everything he had. And one of the things he missed when he was fighting cancer, he got very sick from the treatments, was radio. He loved radio. He made radio what it became. There were conservative hosts and so forth. But Rush was Rush, and there'll never be another Rush. I'll tell you one other story. I've got his line up with Rush. You know, they targeted him. The state attorney down there that covers Palm Beach was a big-time Democrat, and started targeting Rush and went after Rush about his, he had pain, very, very bad pain down his back, and so forth, and he'd had a procedure done, and it didn't turn out well. Anyway, without getting into all the details, he would take some pain medicines, and he so loved you. He so loved his audience. He told you everything that was going on, that it got out of control, the pain medicines and so forth. And you remember he took a period of time off of radio, and he loved radio. That you were his family. That is what he wanted to do every minute of the day. And let me tell you something. He did research every minute of the day. He was online every minute of the day. And quite frankly, so am I for most of the time when I do radio and I do Fox, and now I'm doing this. But that prosecutor decided to go after him. And I felt it was so outrageous what they were doing. And then we did our research, I did, and we saw that Florida had some of the most liberal FOIA rules of any state. That is, you could get information out of the files of the government, phone calls, texts, and all the rest of it, that you might not be able to get in other states. So I decided, you know what, I want to dig into this prosecutor's background and so forth, and I want to dig into his conduct because the leaks were incessant. The leak to the liberal media all through South Florida, into the wire services about their investigation of Rush, attacking Rush, on and on and on, because always they wanted to take Rush out. Rush was monitored, every word he would say. You had Media Matters, you had all these groups. And so I decided, let's fire back. And so we started to gather information on the prosecutor. And first they dragged their feet. So we brought a case against him and them. And then the information we were gathering on the phone calls and so forth, because I wanted to see which reporters they were calling. So this got into a big battle. And I just remember the prosecutor told Rush's personal lawyer, who the hell is this guy Mark Levin? What's this group Landmark Legal Foundation? And Rush's lawyer laughed. He said he has no idea what he's up against, this guy. But in the end, Rush was innocent. He'd always been innocent. But what he did and what that showed America was how human he was and is, no pretenses. He didn't want you to think he was something different than he actually was. What you heard over the microphone was Rush Limbaugh, the real Rush Limbaugh. The only caveat to that is he was very shy. Not with buddies, not with friends, but in public he was very shy. Many of you may have met him at his early rallies and so forth. He would smile, he would take it all in. He was amazed at the support, the thousands of people who would show up. This was Rush Limbaugh, who was criticized because he didn't go to college for one semester. He said, what the hell am I doing here? I'm getting out of here. And that's what he did. Truly an American story, truly a self-made man. And I think about him often. Now, if you like this little clip that you just saw, please head over to YouTube and subscribe, or Rumble and follow, and tell everybody you know.